In the 4th century, Aristotle wrote of politics. Anyone who either cannot lead the common life, or is so self-sufficient as not to need to, and therefore does not partake of society, is either a beast or a god. Politics was defined by Aristotle as the affairs of cities, but more accurately refers to the affairs of states. More generally, politics refers to the perpetual debate over how best we, as neither beasts nor gods, can optimize the societies we live in. In the modern world, understanding of politics comes with the comprehension of a false dichotomy, that there's a left side and a right side. What is traditionally considered the political left are people who believe society is best served by laws which value the collective, while what is referred to as the political right are people who believe society is best served by laws which value the individual. It hasn't always been this way, however, and as I will attempt to demonstrate, there's a lot of cross-pollination of each side's core principles, and confusion attributable to biased perspectives. Historically, the political left was originally conceived as the party of movement, while the right was conceived as the party of order. This lends a direct parallel to the classic conflict between liberals and conservatives, whereas liberals championed the freedom and equality of the people, conservatives championed the established hierarchical authority. From a left-wing perspective, liberals could be seen as progressive, while conservatives could be seen as stagnant, exemplifying in contrast the party of movement. While from a right-wing perspective, conservatives could be seen as protecting the status quo, while liberals could be seen as shaking the boat, introducing chaos and exemplifying, in contrast, the party of order. In this sense, the left could be said to advocate a libertarian society, the freedom of the collective, while the right could be said to advocate an authoritarian society, the authority of the individual. However, times have changed and words in the mouths of some have died, only to find new life in the mouths of others. And what I have just described could be considered the perspective of the political spectrum as observed through a social lens. Through an economic lens, the image flips and introduces an entirely new axis to the dichotomy around which political discussion rotates. Whereas socially liberal people would advocate a smaller government, and socially conservative people would advocate a bigger government, this concept inverts when notions of collectivism and individualism are applied in terms of economics. Consider government spending. One who spends liberally will take liberally, and one who spends conservatively need only take conservatively. Pursuing collectivist economic policies arrives in the form of welfare programs and regulations intended to protect against the dangers of a free market. This increased spending requires a bigger budget, and therefore more taxes on the collective. By contrast, pursuing individualist economic policies by and large means to eliminate such programs and reduce regulations with the intent to bolster the free market. This decreased spending requires a smaller budget, and therefore fewer taxes on individuals. In this way, we can clearly see liberal economic policies paradoxically produce more authoritarian governments, whereas conservative economic policies paradoxically produce more libertarian governments. This notion is further reinforced when we consider the redistribution of wealth and to whom belongs the means of production. Are they to be owned by private individuals, free agents, or by the public collective, the state itself? While it could be argued that either extreme transcends into or out of statehood at some point, I'm not here to espouse the details of specific ideologies. I'm here to paint a picture of two sides. But what two sides are those really? The political left and right would have you believe that you're one or the other. You're either with us or you're against us. And invariably their side is the most righteous at the mutual exclusion of all others. But let's consider what we have learned. The dichotomy between collectivism and individualism appears to be consistent across the board. Democracy advocated for by socially liberal people contrasts neatly with the autocracy advocated for by socially conservative people, while socialism advocated for by economically liberal people competes squarely against capitalism advocated for by economically conservative people. The left and right can both be libertarian and authoritarian across very different issues. But I propose that while liberty is clearly the goal of socially liberal and economically conservative people, I admit it is something of a straw man to suggest that authoritarianism is the implicit goal of economically liberal and socially conservative people. Instead, what it would seem that they advocate is justice. Whether that perceived justice comes in the form of an established hierarchy or flat government, the interventive measures a society takes to right wrongs invariably comes at the expense of liberty, whether of one or of many. And so I propose that the political spectrum is no mere left and right, but justice and liberty, fairness and freedom. It would seem the two are mutually exclusive. One can't help but value liberty except at the expense of justice and vice versa. However, I propose that these ideas are not mutually exclusive, but are in fact interdependent. Justice, taken to its most extreme, valuing fairness over freedom, can be considered pure selflessness, or philosophical altruism, while liberty, taken to its most extreme, valuing freedom over fairness, can be considered pure selfishness, or philosophical egoism. Let's imagine a scenario with this in mind. Suppose an apple, and on either side of this apple are two altruists. Neither can stand to sate their hunger at the expense of the other, so naturally they both starve to death. Now imagine two egoists. Neither can imagine starving while the other gets to eat, so they kill each other. Both of these cases are perfect examples of failures to cooperate for mutual benefit, and by extension are failures of state. Consider, what alternatives could have served both parties' interests without undue risk to themselves? It could be that they split the apple, or better determine one of them isn't as hungry as the other, and divide the apple proportionally. One might even consider deferring the whole apple to one or the other, in return for a second apple in the future. What we see here is a compromise between individual liberty and collective justice. In truth, the two are not so inherently divided as they seem. Liberty can't exist absent of a collective because the concept exists in contrast to freedoms forfeited to the collective. And justice can't exist absent of individuals because the concept exists in contrast to fairness forfeited to individuals. Put another way, there's no reason to establish freedoms without collectives to call them into question, just as there's no reason to establish fairness without individuals to call it into question. Humans have evolved to value both their well-being and the well-being of others. All animals are inherently self-interested. Self-preservation is the oldest and most ingrained value in existence. And from that springs reproduction, which, as humans, as a sexually dimorphic species, naturally select for prosocial traits. So too must any animal between beast and god, which seeks to reap the rewards of mutual cooperation, value the interests of others. These interests will invariably compete, but they must find a common ground, for a species without self-preservation is as doomed as a species that won't reproduce. If liberty is to be asserted, then it must be followed by justice, to be checked in turn by liberty. John Rawls in his 1971 book A Theory of Justice presented this reconciliation. Each person is to have an equal right to the most extensive basic liberty, compatible with a similar liberty for others. In this way, freedom informs fairness and fairness informs freedom. Together, the political left and right each serve a valuable purpose, but apart their principles inflame partisan factionalization, and ultimately drag out the perpetual cycle of revolution into bureaucratic inertia, with all the propaganda and violence that comes with. Rather, if the political left and right can form a centrist coalition, and select for social and economic policies which balance both the interests of the collective and the individuals that comprise it, liberty and justice may just find an equilibrium, and will have stepped forward out of one war of ideas and into the next, on that never-ending quest for something better. Thank you for listening.